The luckiest men who ever lived weren't lottery winners or casino champions. They were ordinary guys who stumbled upon fortunes that would make today's billionaires look broke. We're talking about the absolute most insane stories of pure, ridiculous luck during the California gold rush. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to be questioning everything you thought you knew about fortune and timing. Now, before we dive into these absolutely mind-blowing stories, I need to set the stage here. The year is 1848, and California is basically the Wild West. Most people are scraping by, working their butts off just to survive. Then boom, gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill, and suddenly everyone and their grandmother is packing up their lives and heading west, with nothing but a pickaxe and a dream. But here's the thing that's absolutely crazy about this whole situation. Out of the hundreds of thousands of people who made that journey, only a tiny fraction actually struck it rich. We're talking about odds that would make winning the lottery look easy. But the guys we're going to talk about today, these weren't your typical miners grinding away for months just to find a few flakes of gold dust. These were men who literally stumbled into fortunes by complete accident. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that some of these stories are so ridiculous that if they happened in a movie, you'd probably think the writers were making it up. Let's start with probably the most insane example of pure dumb luck in gold rush history. Meet James Marshall, but not the guy who originally discovered gold. This is a different James Marshall, and his story is absolutely bonkers. This dude was basically a nobody. He wasn't a miner, he wasn't looking for gold, and he definitely wasn't expecting to become one of the richest men in California overnight. Marshall was actually a carpenter who got completely lost while traveling through the Sierra Nevada mountains in 1849. And when I say lost, I mean hopelessly, ridiculously lost. He had been trying to reach a mining camp to do some construction work, but instead ended up wandering around the wilderness for 3 days straight with almost no food and barely any water. By the third day, this guy was basically hallucinating from dehydration and exhaustion. So what does he do? He decides to rest by this random creek to try to get his bearings. And here's where it gets absolutely insane. While he's sitting there, barely conscious, he notices something shiny in the water. At first, he thinks it's just his mind playing tricks on him because he's so dehydrated. But curiosity gets the better of him, and he reaches down to grab whatever it is. What he pulls out of that creek isn't just a nugget, it's a chunk of gold the size of his fist. We're talking about a piece of gold that would be worth over $200,000 in today's money. But wait, it gets even crazier. After finding that first massive nugget, Marshall starts looking around more carefully, and he realizes that this entire creek bed is basically lined with gold. Not flakes, not dust, but actual chunks and nuggets just sitting there waiting to be picked up. Within 2 hours of being completely lost and on the verge of death, this guy had collected enough gold to set him up for life. And the best part? This creek was literally a few hundred yards away from a major mining camp where hundreds of other miners had been working for months without finding anything significant. They had walked past this exact spot dozens of times and never bothered to look down. But Marshall's story gets even more ridiculous. After collecting what he could carry, he finally makes it to the mining camp. And instead of keeping his mouth shut about his discovery, he decides to tell everyone about the creek. You'd think this would be the end of his good fortune, right? Wrong. By the time other miners rushed to the location, they discovered that Marshall's Creek was connected to an entire network of gold-rich waterways that nobody had explored yet. Marshall ended up claiming the mineral rights to a massive section of land that turned out to be one of the richest gold deposits in California history. All of this happened simply because he took an unexpected route and made a series of choices that changed his life. The dude went from being a broke carpenter to owning a mining empire, and it all started because he couldn't read a map properly. And here's what makes this story even more incredible. Marshall later admitted in interviews that he had actually walked past that same creek 2 days earlier while he was still trying to find his way. But he was so focused on getting to his destination that he didn't bother to stop and look around. It was only when he was completely exhausted and had given up on reaching the mining camp that he actually paid attention to his surroundings. The timing had to be absolutely perfect. If he had found his way to the mining camp on day 1, he never would have discovered the creek. If he had been just a little less lost, he might have found a different place to rest. And if he hadn't been so dehydrated that he needed to stop by the water, he never would have seen that first nugget. But Marshall's story is just the beginning, because the gold rush produced some of the most outrageous examples of pure luck that you've probably never heard of. But Marshall wasn't even close to being the luckiest guy during the gold rush. That title probably belongs to a man named Samuel Brannan, and his story is so ridiculous that it sounds like something out of a comedy movie. This dude literally became one of California's first millionaires by selling shovels, and I'm not talking about some brilliant business strategy. I'm talking about pure accidental genius that happened because he was too lazy to go mining himself. Brandon was running a general store in San Francisco in 1848, and business was absolutely terrible. He was basically broke, selling random supplies to the few people who lived in the area. When news of the gold discovery started spreading, instead of rushing off to the mines like everyone else, this guy decided he was too comfortable to leave his store. So what does he do? He figures he might as well try to sell some mining equipment to the people passing through town. Here's where the story gets absolutely insane. Brandon had exactly 9 shovels in his store, and he was originally planning to sell them for 50 cents each. But when the first group of miners showed up asking for supplies, he panicked and accidentally told them the price was $9 per shovel. $9. In 1848, that was more than most people made in a week. He immediately realized his mistake and was about to correct himself when one of the miners said, "Deal, we'll take all of them." Brandon was so shocked that he just stood there with his mouth open while these guys handed him more money than he had seen in months. And that's when it hit him. If people were willing to pay $9 for a shovel, what would they pay for other mining supplies? So he starts marking up everything in his store by ridiculous amounts. Pickaxes that cost him 30 cents were suddenly selling for $12. Pans that he bought for a quarter were going for $8 each. But here's the kicker. Word spread that Brandon's store had reliable and readily available mining equipment, and pretty soon miners were traveling from hundreds of miles away just to shop there. This guy went from selling 9 shovels by accident to running one of the most profitable supply shops in California, all because he made a pricing mistake and was too embarrassed to correct it. Within 6 months, Brandon was making more money per day than most successful miners were making in entire months. And he never once set foot in a mine. While thousands of people were putting in hard labor at the mining sites, he grew wealthy by providing essential tools. A reminder that supporting industries often thrive during big movements in history. And if you think that's where Brandon's luck ended, you're completely wrong. Remember how I mentioned he was too lazy to go mining? Well, it turns out that staying away from hazardous mining environments actually kept him out of danger multiple times. While he was safely counting money in his store, dozens of miners were experiencing injuries from cave-ins, disease, and accidents. The very laziness that made him rich also kept him safe. So there you have it, guys. The most absolutely ridiculous examples of pure dumb luck in human history. These weren't master strategists or brilliant businessmen. These were just regular dudes who happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, with exactly the right amount of cluelessness to stumble into fortunes that would make Jeff Bezos jealous. It's a reminder that life can be unpredictable, and sometimes opportunity shows up in the strangest ways. So maybe next time you get lost or make a pricing mistake, just remember these legends and see where it takes you.